privilege and honour to have Charles here tonight and Polly. This evening promises to be a very inspiring and insightful evening, bringing together two visionaries talking about the sacred economics and sacred law. And without further ado, because we're all very happy to be here, I give you Polly and Charles. Yay! Yay!
Thank you very much, everybody. This is really an absolute delight. Charles and I met a few months ago. We had a kind of snatched hour together at Paddington Basin, didn't we? When we were both kind of rushing to different things. Yep. In fact, we both cancelled appointments because we were so exhausted so that we could see each other. And then discovered that, in fact, we cancelled the same thing that we were both going to. But we met in New York a few weeks ago as well. And we kind of brainstormed that it would be just great to come together and do a bit of in conversation. Because we really are coming from a very similar place in the way we approach our work. And we both so enjoy each other's work that we just thought it would be kind of nice to explore and open that conversation into a more public realm rather than just the two of us kind of going to in a cafe somewhere. Okay. So, Charles, welcome, and thank you very much for coming here.
Yeah, thank you. It's my pleasure.
Yeah, it really is super. Well, what I'd like to ask first of all is actually something I've never really gotten around to asking you is, how on earth did you get to doing such great things writing sacred economics?
Well, let's see, how far should we take it back? Let's start with this lifetime. I mean, really, this book kind of came out of my, should I be looking at you or them? Probably you guys. It arose out of my previous book, The Ascent of Humanity, where I wrote about civilization and why it seems all wrong, and what all these crises are pushing us toward. And one of the crises that I wrote about was the financial crisis. And so I began writing about that just as the...
Yeah.
The other thing is...
Does it come off?
You might have to...
Hello. Is this helping at all? That's better.
Well, that's really uncomfortable.
Okay, so for years, ever since I was a teenager, and like many teenagers, sensing this kind of ambient wrongness in the world, but not knowing what it was, I've been, because of that sense, unable to wholeheartedly participate in the program that was offered to me and the world that was presented as normal. But I was more fortunate than most teenagers because whereas most teenagers are told in a million different ways, you're wrong, the world is fine, adapt to it, and if you can't, then the problem is with you. I had a politically very liberal, bordering on radical father who gave me books that confirmed my sense that the world isn't supposed to be this way. Books like Silent Spring, A People's History of the United States, books by Wendell Berry, E.F. Schumacher, and so forth. So, to make a long story short, I dug down level after level trying to find the origin of the wrongness. And eventually I came to I guess you could say the defining mythologies of our civilization. The answers to the questions, who are you? What's important? Who are we as a people? What is it to be human? What's valuable? Where do we come from? Where are we going? And money is central to all of these questions. It's not maybe at the very base, but any phenomenon that any social phenomenon, any political phenomenon, and even our own psychology, when you ask, well, why is this happening? You usually get to money somehow. Why are we cutting down the rainforests? Well, there's profit to be made. Why are we not dealing with climate change? And what about the prison system? And why isn't Ecocide, why was that thrown out when they were writing the UN Charter? Why? Well, there's an answer that has to do with money. So money is so central to the way that we see the universe, the way that we see the world, the way that we see ourselves, that I became very interested in how money works, and I wrote a book on it. And that's the answer to your question, I guess. See, these things are built so that you can only see the head, which is like the only important part, of course.
So that's how it all started, really. Good books when you were younger.
That's one explanation.
One aspect.
Yeah.
For me, I was very bookish. I was very shy as a child. I hid behind books, if anything. It was my kind of salvation was to read a lot. And that kind of took me on my starting point as well. But it was kind of different books. What we had at home was, amongst other things, the Encyclopedia Britannica. And I don't know if you remember, it was kind of big in the 70s and 80s to have the Encyclopedia Britannica. And it sort of stretched and stretched and stretched. And I thought, well, if I start at one end, I could kind of maybe get to the other end, by the end of the year. And I don't think I got past halfway through A and sort of realised it's just never ever going to happen. But what I did find myself doing was actually going off in tangents. I suddenly discovered something and go down a rabbit hole of inquiry. I'd start reading something, it would lead me to somewhere else and lead me to somewhere else. And actually, in a way, I still do that. I go down a rabbit hole and it leads me somewhere. I have a thought and I think, well, what does that mean? Where will that take me? And sometimes I think actually giving ourselves the time to follow a thought and go down the rabbit hole and see what little warrens turn up and what directions they take us can be a really productive way of actually engaging with really big questions. And in fact, the really big question for me was, could we actually create an international crime of ecocide? That really was going down the rabbit hole and going into those warrants of inquiry and finding out, okay, that's a dead end, but there is another avenue, what's have you. And I literally put 3 whole months solid to it. I hardly slept, I hardly ate, I hardly drank when I did that. And I just subjected it to intense, rigorous inquiry. It was kind of bordering on the obsessiveness to do it, but it just became single-minded to do that. And sometimes writing's a bit like that as well. You just end up getting into a world where it's, having to kind of come out very fast, from me anyway. I don't know, do you have that similar sort of feeling when you're writing?
Yeah, although, I have three boys at home. So I have a lot of other kind of, can you guys still hear back there okay? No. I have other demands on
Boom. Sorry, a little bit too loud.
But, so here Polly has been, obsessed with Ecocide, and until I met her, I hadn't really given it too much thought. Nonetheless, as soon as we met, there was instant recognition that here's somebody who is serving the same thing that I'm serving, an ally. And I thought maybe, and it needed no explanation, right? It's obvious, it's just something you can feel. But because we are today in a university lecture hall in the realm of the head, I thought I might unpack that feeling and translate it into intellectual terms a little bit. What does sacred economics have to do with sacred law? What is sacred economics? What is sacred law? Sacred economics and sacred law. So I want to say first that when I talk about sacred economics, I mean to align money with the things that are becoming sacred to us today, the things that we value today, the things that we venerate. And in the past, on the civilizational level, what we venerated and valued was growth, the conquest of nature, the gradual ascension of humanity to dominion over the natural realm, to become the lords and possessors of nature, possessors. So the money system that we've grown up in for hundreds of years, thousands of years maybe, has been part and parcel of the conversion of nature into property. And in this process, and it wasn't just economics, but science as well, made nature into a thing, kind of this generic substrate upon which we would impose our design. So here's one connection between sacred economics and sacred law. The ecocide is only a crime if nature is not just a pile of instrumental stuff. Otherwise, maybe it would be inconvenient to destroy ecosystems, but it wouldn't be a crime. It might be unwise, but it wouldn't violate our moral sense if it's just a bunch of protons, neutrons, and electrons bumping around together. But we are graduating from that worldview, understanding the uniqueness and interconnectedness of all things. And I would, if I had to define the sacred, I would say that when we recognize something as sacred, we recognize its uniqueness and interconnectedness. And that's why I would say that making a crime of ecocide is an expression of sacred law. Sacred economics is also a realignment of the money system so that, for example, destruction of ecosystems and immiseration of other cultures, of indigenous people, and all of the horrible things going on are no longer ways to make money. But what we want to do, or part of the vision, is to change the system of economic incentives so that the best ecological decision becomes identical with the best business decision. And that's part of it. But there's a problem here, okay? And the problem is, so a lot of economists are working on things like valuing ecosystem services so that, and internalizing costs, so that if you pollute, if you cut down a rainforest, if you put CO2 into the air, that is very expensive and is reflected in the cost of the products, so that there is an economic incentive to minimize waste, to use recycled resources, and so forth. Okay, and this is indeed an alignment with money with what is sacred. But there's a problem here, because what we're really doing when we do that is we're reducing the infinite to the finite. So suppose you value a certain ecosystem at $50 billion. I'm an American, so I'm going to use dollars. Well, so $50 billion. So if you destroy this ecosystem, it's going to be very expensive. But you're also saying that if you could make $51 billion by destroying this ecosystem or eradicating this species, then you should do it. Who decides what the value is? Well, realistically, it's probably going to be the same people who are going to make $51 billion from eradicating it, because politics and money are inextricably intertwined. So I think that complementary to sacred economics, complementary to aligning our system of value with the sacred, we also have to have some way of protecting things that are of infinite preciousness. For example, human life. Like murder, you can't get away with murder by paying a fine, because we recognize a human life as sacred. And by the same token, we need legal protection on the planet, as long as we believe that it has a value that cannot be measured, that cannot be quantified. And so that's like that's one way to kind of unpack this, affinity and this feeling like, yeah, we're serving the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And everything that Charles says, and I know a lot of you know my work anyway, is coming from very much that same place, that understanding that actually life itself is sacred. This is not about putting a price tag on Earth or ecosystem services. It's so much bigger than that. It's so much more sacred than that. And when we put a price tag on the very life of the earth that we walk on, that we engage with, that we are codependent upon, interdependent with, then all we're doing is subjecting it to an old paradigm where you can buy and you can sell. And when you can just buy and sell without looking to consequences, then that is all about ownership, that's all about property law. And this is really about moving towards something far more sophisticated than that. It's about trusteeship principles. It's moving away from ownership, I own. Because when I own, I can buy, I can sell, I can use, I can abuse without consequence. But when I look at my engagement with the world as a trustee, as a guardian, as a steward, then actually something fundamentally shifts within us, because we move away from a disconnected world to it being relational. There's something very fundamental that happens within us if we see ourselves in a trusteeship role or a guardianship role. We look to the longer term. We look to 7 generations hence, and we understand from a very different place. It doesn't come from here, it actually comes from here. And that's reflected in law, because we talk about a legal duty of care. And care, of course, comes from the heart. We care. And that's a legal term. I owe a duty of care. And that's all about trusteeship law. Now, when I was researching my first book, Eradicating Ecocide, I looked back into the history of what's known as a sacred trust. It actually exists in law. It's known as that, a sacred trust. And it's based on trusteeship principles, not ownership principles, but trusteeship. So you're working from a premise of being in service to something greater than the self. When you're a trustee, it's always being in service, not master and servant relationship, but being in service, which is a wider context. And it's an understanding that you're actually acting on behalf of the benefit for other beings or others. It may well be, I'm expanding it, I'm saying it's not just humans to humans that you're looking after, but it's all inhabitants, that we have a guardianship role here to play in looking after the way we engage the relationship we have with the earth itself. But the very concept of a sacred trust goes back into the annals of time. And when I was researching this, I discovered written documentation that went back to the 16th century, talking about our sacred trust, our human sacred trust, where our number one duty of care is to look after to the utmost the wider community. I call it the wider earth community. So this is something that, and I'm sure if there was more research done, it would go back further in the annals of time. And actually, if you look at many religions, if you look deeply into them, there is that concept of understanding. It's not about man's dominion over land. It's actually that we have a responsibility, a guardianship role. The whole idea of property is a human-made concept. We made it up to decide who had what. Now, somewhere along the line, those scales of justice have become so imbalanced because we have so favoured property and ownership. Literally, money has become king in all of this. Profit has become king, rather. And I say it's about rebalancing that. And that's where, instead of ownership principles, it's about bringing those trusteeship principles back to the fore. Because when we see ourselves in that guardianship role, we have a far more expansive way of engaging with life itself. In fact, it's the difference between life-affirming processes rather than destructive processes. So it's 2 different ways of fundamentally looking at it. And looking at what you write and talk about, Charles, you're dealing with sacred economics, and in fact, I've just been finishing a chapter on economic ecocide, our current paradigm, how it's economic ecocide, how our whole economic system is premised on making money out of damage and destruction. So much of that comes from mass damage and destruction, and how it needs a disruptor to fundamentally shift that. And that's what I believe a law of ecocide is. It's a disruptor. It's something that can come in and literally come in left field, kind of like a curveball, and sort of say, okay, we now fundamentally shift the way we think about things, and we put in an overriding duty of care, which starts with first, do no harm. That really is the underlying message with the law of ecocide. First, do no harm. And when we start from that premise, our decision-making changes completely. Because then that's the overriding factor, not how much profit do we make out of things. I'm not anti-profit, not at all. What I am very interested in is how we engage in creating a different flow of funding, of money, and actually energy. Right? Money is just a physical manifestation of energy. And Lynn Twist, when I first met her about 3-4 years ago, she talked about this, how in fact money is an energy like water. It can flow into good stuff. Where you put your money matters. You know, whether or not you're going to invest in life-affirming projects, or money can flow into damage and destruction, and when it does, it becomes really toxic. And look at the huge amount of investment of finance that goes into the Athabasca tar sands, for instance. Or money can become stagnant. Actually hoarding it in a bank vault somewhere is actually failing to release the good energy that can be used there, to allow it to flow into something else that can be life-affirming, can be life-creating. So there's something about how we engage with our relationship with money as well here that's shifting. It's certainly shifting within me, and trying to understand that as well, how a law of ecocide can help create a new paradigm for where our economic system goes, how we create a more natural economy that's governed by natural law, actually, so that there's a flow rather than it all getting stuck over here in the damage and destruction. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I've been trying to remember all of the different things that this is bringing up. I love your Scottish accent, by the way. Yeah, so that, like when you were talking about trusteeship, you know, and kind of this, even taking it back to a religious basis, and it's not about dominion, you know. And I was thinking, like, here's another intersection between economics and law. Like, property is a legal concept. Economists like to pretend that it's a purely economic concept. And what is it to own something? Well, that's obvious. It means that you can buy it and sell it. But if you actually look back into the history of property, it wasn't that obvious what it was to own something. Like, especially taking like the quintessential example of property is land, right? Real estate, real property. Well, it wasn't that long ago when you really couldn't buy and sell land. If you were a feudal lord, for example, like, you were given title to the land, like a title, like Earl or Duke or something like that. But that didn't mean you could sell your land. In a lot of parts of Europe, if you wanted to sell your land, you had to get the agreement of every single one of your extended family, you know, and including Uncle Bob, who says no to everything. And basically it meant that you couldn't buy and sell land. And to this day, like, what property rights mean differs from country to country. In Sweden, for example, property rights do not mean that you can exclude people. There's no such thing as trespassing. You can go on any land you want. In England, it's a bit like that too. What's it called? Rambling, you know? In the States, forget it, you know? It's like no trespassing laws everywhere. And you know, you can't. I mean, there's this beautiful vista, and the only place you're allowed to be is the road. So property can mean different things, and it's a legal concept. And I think that one intersection between sacred economics and sacred law is a shift in what it means to own property. So part of this would be perhaps a shift toward Georgist taxation. And I don't know, some of you know what that is, but basically it expresses this principle that the land, we are stewards of it. It was given to us, just like you were saying. Like the land, the earth is a gift. And what does that mean? Well, traditional Christians, at least in my country, they say, well, that means that we can do whatever we want with it. But if you think about it, like if someone gives you a gift and you trash that gift, that's an insult to the giver, isn't it? So I would like to argue, I don't often have the chance, but if I am speaking to evangelical Christians, I would say that by making a ruin of our planet, we are insulting God. We're insulting the giver of this gift. And to do honor to the Creator, we should treat the land in a beautiful way. And so that coincides with the trusteeship that you're talking about. It's to treat it as a gift. And a gift is a fundamental economic concept that goes deeper than money. Because you can study the economies of cultures that don't use money. They're gift cultures. And so that's one interesting intersection that I noticed. And then there's a lot I'd like to play off of. Money is just energy. But it's energy with a certain dynamic built into it. A dynamic of scarcity and a dynamic of growth, because it's created as interest-bearing debt. So there's never enough of it. So somebody's always left out. We're always in competition with each other. And the only way the system can keep going is if we keep creating even more money, which means creating even more debt. But that's okay, because we can create even more money. So it necessitates the expansion of the money realm, bringing more and more of the unowned into the property realm, bringing more and more of nature into the realm of product, more and more of human relationships into the realm of services, until there's nothing left, until we can't cut down any more forests or drill any more oil or deplete more topsoil or aquifers, or destroy any more ecosystems, because there's none left. And then as that happens, growth stagnates, debt rises faster than income, and the whole thing falls apart. And we're seeing that happen now. Holly's cause, protecting ecosystems, rights of nature, that actually hastens the economic crisis. Because it says, here's some things that we will not allow to be converted into money. Well, that means that the growth machine is going to stop a little sooner. All the politicians are saying that the way out of our crisis is to reignite economic growth. To do that, we have to increase demand. We have to increase employment. We have to make more stuff. Is that really what we need on a finite planet forever? A different solution would require a different money system. And I'm not going to go into the details now, but I might later.
Charles, that's really interesting, because I don't often admit to the fact that I think it will hasten the economic crisis as well. But what is very interesting here is that I presume you've probably heard of the term healing crisis. You know, when you end up sick, in fact, actually, just last weekend, I ended up very sick. Suddenly, I was vomiting. And it was a kind of 24-hour healing crisis. Something needed to get out of me very, very fast. And for a while, the symptoms seemed to get far, far worse. But the worst that can come out of it is actually you feel far better than you were to start with. So it actually takes you to a better place. But a really good healing crisis also brings a change in perception or understanding. A wisdom comes with it, a learning somewhere, a recognition that actually that's an old way that I want rid of, and here's a new way I want to go forward with. I think my big problem is cheese. Whatever. But if we look at
That's a profound realization.
but if we look at the economic crisis as a kind of healing crisis, that what's happening here is that maybe for a little while the symptoms will become worse before actually we get to a better place. But there's a purging, there's a clearing out of the system, and that's what's needed. And I was very struck, and I was talking to Charles just earlier, how I actually caught a few online videos of Bloomberg, the new mayor of New York, who actually was back in Wall Street after it had been closed down by being absolutely washed out, literally and figuratively, for 2 days. And there he was ringing the bell, saying, back to business as usual. And it was one of these healing crises that actually, nothing had been learned. How many more times does this need to happen? But also what's very interesting, of course, is he's coming from a different perspective, a different paradigm. What does it take to change that paradigm? And that's very interesting because there is that old adage of, don't look to the people who caused the problem to think up the new solution or wording to that effect. You'll not find the new way of thinking from the old way of thinking. And it's occurred to me that this is indeed what's happening here, is that you've still got old thinking, old doing continuing, no matter what. Even when the waves crash at the doors of Wall Street, we still get back in there, ring the bell and get back to business.
Yeah, people don't usually, like me, for example, people don't usually change if it's still possible to pretend that things are normal. And even further, even if it's no longer possible to pretend, if you can still pretend that normal is going to come back, then still people don't change. And I think societies are the same way. So yeah, maybe for it to be a healing, if you get sick and you throw up for a day and you still don't realize that cheese is the problem, you're going to get even sicker sometime. And I think that, eventually it's going to become impossible to pretend that normal is coming back. And only when that happens will the hopelessly radical become common sense. Right now, all of the stuff we're working on is, in a sense, hopelessly radical. Although, I don't know, Polly's like some kind of magician, she's speaking at The Hague and stuff like that. So maybe not so impossible, but still. Definitely not on the mainstream radar. But at some point, when our old stories, our old institutions become obviously, transparently inoperative, then all the stuff that probably everybody in this room is working on, that is alternative, radical, holistic, fringe, will become the new normal. But we have to go through this crisis, I think it's even more of a not only a healing crisis, but the coming of age crisis of humanity.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that's absolutely right. And I think actually that's a wonderful thing, that we are alive today, living through this process. What an amazing time to be alive. More than any other time in the whole of history of civilization. The best time to be alive is now, and really alive. And this is about engaging, this is about being a participant in co-creating that new world. And I do think we have a choice in life. We can sit back and be an observer of life, and it just kind of comes at us like those waves. They wash towards you, they hit you until actually you're shunted or you're shifted in a different direction. Or you can actually literally step onto the stage of life and become a participant, a co-creator of where you want life to go. And that's really powerful. That point when each of us stands up and says, no, I'm going to change things for the better because I want that to happen. And that creates its own dynamic around it. Putting out an intent like that actually attracts in people around you who can help make it happen. I see that happening all the time.
Yeah.
You see that?
Yeah, I mean, it's like a choice between two worlds. I think that the personal choice mirrors our collective choice. So in the old world, what's the purpose of life? In the old paradigm, in economic language, the purpose of life is to maximize your security. In biological terms, the purpose of life is to maximize reproductive self-interest. And that's what science has told us. That's what programs us. That's how DNA works. This is actually obsolete biology, but very recently obsolete, unless you know about Barbara McClintock and Lynn Margulis. And so all of us face this choice between two worlds, or this transition from one world, one logical framework to another. And in the old framework, you make decisions based on security, financial self-interest. What about my retirement? What about my benefits? Will I be okay? Can I afford to do that? And in the new paradigm, which I would say is the paradigm of the gift, we make our choices based on what is it that I'm called to give? What's my life about? What gifts do I carry that can be of service to this thing that wants to be born on Earth, this a sacred society?
And my mother reminded me earlier this year that she was saying, you know, Polly, when you were there, we actually, you know, we really loved it because you were such a happy child. And everyone knew Polly because she'd take them all off on adventures into the woods and she'd write the new rules of the game and get everyone to come on board. And I thought, oh my God, it's kind of what I'm doing now. I'm sort of reverting back to sort of childhood way of doing things. And in a way, when I ended up becoming a barrister, it was kind of I was reacting against something. Because when I became a teenager, I ended up at an all-boys Catholic school in Scotland, which you might think would be really great, and in some respects it was really great. But in other respects it wasn't. It was very controlled. And this didn't work for me. I like my freedom. And to actually have Jesuit priests who were clearly not very used to having women who were quite used to kind of, you know, going off and writing their own rules of the game. Very soon I ended up running into trouble with the art teacher. And how he kept school in order was he used to pick on a younger child and bully them. He'd get them up on a desk and he'd get them to stand on one leg. But if they dared to put the other leg down, then he would whip them or punch them. And I thought this was utterly untenable. I could not bear it. It was a gross misjustice, but everyone else would pretend it wasn't happening. And one day, here was this little boy, he'd been standing on the desk, he couldn't keep his leg up any longer, he put it down. And the teacher got him up against the wall, I was ready to punch him, and I saw these little shorts, the little boy and the pee running down the inside of his leg. He was so terrified. So I took the matter into my own hands and I punched the teacher instead. I didn't think that one through. Half an hour later I was in front of the school gates, that was it. I was out. But what was very interesting was that in a way it was no surprise I turned to law. You know, I realised very quickly using fists was not the answer. Maybe it was about using words to deal with gross injustice. What was very strange was that I actually ended up going into corporate law, not environmental law. That's not where I come from. So I'm looking through fundamentally a very different lens, where I was representing people I got on very well with, big transnational corporations, and they're all courts of justice just in front of here actually, and representing good, intelligent people in court, but thinking, how is it that people think it's so normal to make lots of profit out of mass damage and destruction. How can that be? How can that be? And that was a question that really did bother me, that we've created such a normalising of a process. And actually law has created that problem. It is the law for a CEO and his or her directors to put the interests of their shareholders first, which normally means to maximise profit. It is the law to do that. So this was one of these things that kind of took me on the journey, and it was one of these things of, law's not working here. And I kind of, someone needs to rewrite the rules here. And I looked around to try and find those lawyers that were doing it. And environmental law wasn't enough. It's not working. I know it's not working because we're destroying the Amazon at an ever faster rate. So we can see it's not working. So much environmental law is based on fines and permit allocation. It does not work. And it was actually kind of coming back to that childhood thing of, I'll make up the new rules. Someone needs to do this. We need to rewrite those rules. And looking around trying to find someone and not finding people out there, and actually coming back to myself and thinking, what are the new rules that need to be written? And in a way, this is what it's about. It's about fundamentally rewriting the terms of engagement of life. Now, actually, my ultimate world is a world without law, written law. Really. And I actually think that is attainable. In my life, that is my greatest desire, that we get to that. But we need bridges to get there. And that really is about bridges of law that are based on intrinsic values, not imposed values. Not putting a price tag, a dollar sign on something, but actually recognising the very sacredness of life itself. And that's something that I really aspire to being and doing, is doing what I'm doing from a place of love. I'm practising it. I don't think I'm an expert yet. But if we come from a place of love, then I think we will fundamentally get to a world of peace as well. And it's no accident that Ecocide is recognised as the missing fifth crime against peace. But this is actually ultimately a peace agenda. When we're at peace with ourselves and with each other and with the earth, then we act and we work from a place of caring, a place of deep, deep love. And I think you have a few things to say about love as well.
I could. So today, when we act from a place of love, it very often contradicts financial self-interest. The things that we want to do with our lives that come from love, the healing work, charitable work, work on behalf of society, on behalf of ecosystems, planting forests, restoring wetlands, going into permaculture. Like, there's not a lot of money in those things. I like to joke, I ask people, what do you do? Oh, social work. Are you doing that to get rich? Well, in a sane society, you should. In a sane society where money represents society's agreement about what's valuable, those things should be the most richly rewarded professions. But instead, we have those things being marginal or even unpaid. Meanwhile, things that contribute most rapidly to the destruction of the planet, there's the most money in those things. And I'm generalizing here, okay? There's some glitches in this system, and some people do what they love and make a good living from it. But generally speaking, the tide of money goes against the impulse to act from love. And so we have this conflict between self-interest and our deep desire to serve. We have a conflict between the logic of the heart and the logic of the mind, and the logic of self-interest. So I ask, where does this conflict come from? Why does money have this property that it goes against the logic of the heart? After all, it's just a human agreement. Why do we agree on this? And I think that we could blame money as the deepest source of evil today, but I think it rests on an even deeper source, which is the answer to the question, who are you? What is it to be human? Who are you? And the answer that we have, that has been given to us by science, by religion, by psychology, by philosophy, by everything, has been what you are is a separate being among other separate beings in an external, objective universe that's separate from you. You are a flesh robot programmed by your DNA to maximize reproductive self-interest. You are a bubble of psychology inside a prison of flesh. You are a skin-encapsulated soul, separate from other souls, right? All these different physics. You are this mass of little generic particles that bump around according to impersonal laws. Like all of these agree on what a self is. But other cultures did not agree that that's what a self was. Ancient cultures believed that self included what we would call other, that the self had many layers, going all the way out to the entire cosmos. We have a civilization and a money system that embodies what you could call separation. And it's falling apart. And that collapse is birthing us into a more expansive understanding of who we are, an understanding that includes the other, and this is something we can feel, Everyone's had these moments where you know that you're not this separate mote of Cartesian consciousness in a flesh robot, but you feel at one with somebody or with something. I mean, we can feel when like Vanessa and the life cairn, like you go there, and this is a monument to all of the extinct species. Like, this is, I remember when my father was, when I was young, my father told me about the passenger pigeons. He said, 150 years ago, the skies of this continent were covered by flocks of passenger pigeons, so huge they would darken the sky for 3 days. And now they are all extinct. And I cried. Why does that hurt? Why does ecocide hurt? It's because we're not separate from these beings. The mind says, well, that's just irrational. Why should it hurt you? Who cares? It shouldn't hurt. Why should it hurt? Is it some rational calculation that my selfish interest will be impinged upon because there will be fewer medicines to be made from the rainforest species that are dying out, and that the economic benefits of cutting down the forests are less than the economic benefits, and therefore that hurts? No. It hurts. And by the way, as activists, and here's something practical, as activists, when we invoke the economic losses to be caused by ecosystem destruction and use that as our primary argument to try to sway public opinion or to sway policymakers, it never works. And it's dishonest, because that's not what motivates us. And that's what I'm thinking when Polly's talking about acting from love. Part of that is to see other people as just as divine and just as connected as we are. And to understand that what they really want to do is to act from this place too. So this expansion of the self that we are undergoing now, the new answer to who are you, which is, I am the sum total of all relationships that converge in this spot. I'm everything. Every person is a mirror of myself. Everything I do comes back to me. Like this, the feeling of this expansion of self is love, And I like to translate it sometimes like this into cognitive terms, because I want to bring heart and mind into alignment, and from this logic of inner being, of interconnection, the urgings of the heart no longer conflict with the logic of the mind. And I could go on about how modern physics calls into question the separation of self and other, how modern biology calls into question the competitive nature of life and the selfish gene, but I won't do that now, but let's just say that the separate self is becoming scientifically obsolete, spiritually obsolete, and especially practically obsolete. It motivates this program of control. There's this external universe out there, this generic substrate of instrumental stuff, this arena of impersonal forces that are indifferent or hostile to me. Therefore, to enjoy security, to enjoy goodness, I have to conquer this external universe. I have to exert control. That's not working very well. We have a whole civilization based on control, a whole medical system based on control, an educational system based on control, an economic system, a political system. They're all falling apart right now. So it's not working scientifically, practically, spiritually. We're being expelled from the world of separation and entering the age of reunion. And yeah, let's be practical. Like, what does law look like from that place? What does money look like from that place? You know? And what does political action look like from that place? If we act from another place, if we act from the old story of separation, conquering evil, for example, we're not going to create anything but more of the same. So this is important to think about, I think. Yeah.
Also, there's another side to it, you know, on a practical level. How many people will we put out of a job? You know, will we put lawyers out of jobs? That could be a good thing. Will we put prisons out of, make them obsolete? Wouldn't that be amazing to actually get to that place where we no longer need prisons? I mean, this is somewhere there, though, within this kind of future visioning of what the new world could be like, and how we get there. Now, it may seem completely utopian, but isn't that a wonderful aspiration to get to a place where we no longer need prisons? Wouldn't that be fantastic? That, to me, is something worthy of moving towards. And also, you know, I mean, this is really about what will the new world look like? And I'm very much, I get very excited by people who are busy with the envisioning of where the new world can go. We seem to have kind of lost the ability, especially in the Western world, to envision the new. Or certainly a lot of people who are very busy in jobs just getting on and doing all day. There is a beauty in taking time out to kind of actually, you know, put out there what our visions are, our wishes, our engagement to where the beautiful new world can go. And no idea is too big. That's the wonder of it. You know, the bigger the better, because once you start putting out the bigger intent, something you fundamentally shift people's perception and understanding. And I love big thinkers. That's really, Charles, you're a big thinker for me, and I really enjoy and engage in everything that you talk about, because it also challenges me. It pushes my visions, expands my vision. You know. And I'm not afraid of having my vision expanded or challenged or moved or shifted, especially when it's taking me to a better place. That in itself is a very enjoyable endeavor, I think.
Especially when anything that's not big thinking is not enough. Like anything that's like on the political radar screen, and it's practical, you know, and it's politically responsible, it's not nearly enough, you know.
Yeah, I really find, you know, when people say, well, we have to be realistic, let's be realistic. Well, what do realists do? They just create more of what is.
Realistic's unrealistic.
Yeah, completely.
Yeah.
Completely. So I really love it. I was actually voted one of the most unreasonable people in the world. Some random American green magazine. But how fantastic, what an accolade. Because unreasonable people refuse to accept what is. And some of the most unreasonable people are permaculturalists. Anyone who does permaculture is unreasonable, fundamentally. Because they stand there and they say, I refuse to accept what is, I don't want vegetables covered in chemicals. I don't want to be eating stuff that's polluting the land and polluting my own body. I'm going to start growing, I'm going to engage, I'm going to create my own businesses, I'm going to train up people. In fact, I'm going to apply permaculture principles to the way I live and be and do. And that's something that I actually apply to the way I engage with law. I look at permaculture principles and I ask myself, how does that apply to law? And one of the two very good actually aspects of permaculture that really have engaged me, the idea that the greatest amount of creativity happens in the margins, where two ecosystems meet. So the edge of a pond and the land, that's where you get the largest amount of activity. I learnt that from Zoe, who's part of my team, who's a deep permie, deep green permie. And actually, that's the same with engagement with big ideas. You find that the big ideas happen, they begin from the margins. They don't start from the centre of the establishment world. Of course not. The establishment world is very comfortable with where it is. The big ideas start from the margins, where there's space to be creative, where the challenging is happening, where the questioning, the querying. When I was in New York, I had the wonderful opportunity of being invited to speak at Occupy Wall Street. And what I saw there was a real dynamic convergence of ideas. I came away thinking, you know, Occupy is the new playground of the new world. It's the idea, the place to bounce around new ideas, to engage, to actually give voice to them, share them, see what other people think, see what comes in and out. It's very exciting.
A new parliament.
Yes, yes. It's a people's process as well. And that is very constructive in its own right. What is emerging there, and not just in Wall Street, but of course around the world, everywhere, there's something dynamic emerging here. Don't know quite where it'll go, where it's going. But you know, we're all seeding into it one way or another. And you all are, by being here today, you are part of that. You are participants in this process. That's for sure.
Yeah. We're just reminding you that you're not crazy. Or at least no crazier than we are.